My family forced me to pay for an expensive dinner, then humiliated me by calling me broke in front of the entire restaurant. What they didn't know was that I owned every inch of that place, and by the end of the night, they'd learn exactly what real power looks like. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Chloe, and last Saturday night changed everything. I should have seen it coming, really. The dinner invitation came through a group text from my mother, Patricia, casual as always, like she was asking me to pick up milk from the store. Family celebration at Rosewood Bistro tonight, 7 sharp, don't be late. No context, no explanation of what we were celebrating, just an order disguised as an invitation. I stared at that message while sitting in my Pearl District apartment, rain tapping against the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Willamette River. Portland's skyline stretched before me, all glass and steel and promise. But all I could think about was how that restaurant name made my stomach twist. Rosewood Bistro. Of course it had to be there. Of all the upscale places in this city, they had to pick the one that meant everything to me. I almost didn't go. That would have been the smart thing to do, the self-preserving thing. But there's something about family that makes you keep showing up, even when every instinct screams at you to run. Maybe it's hope. Maybe it's stupidity. Maybe there's no difference. I arrived at Rosewood Bistro 15 minutes early, partly out of habit and partly because I wanted to see the place before they got there. The hostess, Amanda, greeted me with a warm smile that faltered when she saw my expression. She'd been working there for 3 years since we first opened, and she knew me well enough to read the tension in my shoulders. "Everything okay tonight, Chloe?" she asked quietly, her voice barely audible over the soft jazz playing through the sound system. I forced a smile and straightened my black dress, the one I'd chosen specifically because it was expensive enough to meet my mother's standards but understated enough not to draw too much attention. Just a family dinner. You know how it is. Amanda nodded knowingly. She'd seen enough family dynamics play out in this dining room to understand the weight behind those words. "Table 12 is ready for you. I put you in the corner booth like you prefer." Table 12. The one with the best view of the kitchen, where I could watch the controlled chaos that I'd helped create. Where I could see Tyler moving between the prep stations, ensuring every plate that left the kitchen met our standards. Where I could observe the seamless dance of servers weaving between tables, carrying conversations and dreams and perfectly crafted meals to people celebrating their own moments. I settled into the booth and watched the dinner crowd fill the restaurant. Couples sharing intimate conversations over wine, business associates sealing deals over appetizers, families laughing over dessert. This was what I'd envisioned when I first walked through this space 2 years ago, when it was nothing but exposed brick walls and potential. This was what I'd poured my savings into, what I'd sacrificed sleep and social life for, what I'd built from nothing into something beautiful. My phone buzzed. A text from my brother Brandon. "Running late. Start without us if you want." Of course he was running late. Brandon was always running late, always making excuses, always sliding through life on charm and the assumption that other people would pick up his slack. It used to irritate me, but now it just felt predictable, like everything else about my family. 20 minutes past 7, they finally arrived. I watched them walk through the front door like they owned the place, which was ironic in ways they couldn't possibly understand. My father Richard led the way, his silver hair perfectly styled, his navy suit crisp despite the Portland drizzle outside. He had that confident stride that came from 40 years in commercial real estate, the kind of walk that said he belonged in every room he entered. Behind him came my mother Patricia, elegant in her cream-colored blazer and pearl necklace, the same pearls she'd worn to every important family event for the past decade. She scanned the restaurant with the critical eye of someone who made a living staging homes for wealthy buyers, noting the lighting, the table arrangements, the way the servers moved through the space. I could almost see her calculating the cost per square foot in her head. Brandon brought up the rear, checking his phone even as Amanda led them to the table. At 28, he still had that boyish charm that had gotten him out of trouble his entire life. His hair was tousled in that expensive way that looked casual but probably took 20 minutes to achieve, and his smile was already working its magic on Amanda, who blushed despite herself. "Chloe!" My mother's voice carried that particular note of surprise she always used when she saw me, as if my presence was unexpected, even though she'd specifically invited me. "You look tired, sweetheart. Are you getting enough sleep?" It was classic Patricia. Start with what looked like concern but felt like criticism. I'd heard variations of this greeting my entire life. "You look thin, you look pale, you look stressed." Never just hello, never just glad to see you. "I'm fine. Mom, just working a lot." I stood to give her the obligatory hug, catching a whiff of her Chanel perfume, the same scent she'd worn since I was a child. My father clapped me on the shoulder with the kind of pat you'd give a business associate. "Good to see you, kiddo. How's the job search going?" The job search. Right. Because in their minds, I was still unemployed, still struggling, still the disappointment who couldn't quite get her life together. They had no idea that I'd been running my own business for 2 years, that I employed 15 people, that I'd turned a profit in my first year when most restaurants failed within 6 months. "Actually, things are going really well," I said carefully. "I'm in a good place right now." Brandon finally looked up from his phone long enough to join the conversation. "That's great, sis. Still living in that tiny apartment downtown?" The tiny apartment, my 1,200 square foot space with panoramic city views that cost more per month than most people made. But to Brandon, who lived in a house my parents had bought him in the West Hills, anything smaller than 3,000 square feet was tiny. We settled into the booth, and I watched my family take in their surroundings. This was their first time at Rosewood Bistro, though they didn't know I was aware of that fact. I'd been tracking their dining patterns for months, partly out of curiosity and partly because I wanted to understand their tastes. They preferred the old money establishments, places with history and tradition, and wine lists that required a second mortgage. Rosewood Bistro was newer, hipper, more focused on innovation than tradition. We served dishes that told stories, ingredients sourced from local farms, cocktails crafted with house-made syrups and garnishes that looked like art. It wasn't their usual scene, which made me wonder why they'd chosen it for whatever celebration they had in mind. "This place is interesting," my mother said, which in Patricia speak meant she wasn't entirely sure what to make of it. "Very modern, very Portland." She said Portland the way other people might say experimental, with just enough hesitation to suggest it might not be entirely civilized. Our server approached the table, a young woman named Lisa who'd been with us for 8 months. She had purple highlights in her dark hair and a small nose ring that my mother definitely noticed and definitely disapproved of. Lisa had been studying culinary arts at the local community college when I hired her, and she'd proven to be one of our best servers, intuitive about what customers needed and passionate about the food we served. "Good evening, folks. Welcome to Rosewood Bistro. Can I start you off with something to drink?" My father ordered a bourbon, neat. My mother requested a glass of their best Chardonnay. Brandon asked for whatever craft beer they had on tap that was local. I ordered sparkling water with lime, knowing I needed to stay sharp for whatever was coming. "The wine list here is quite extensive," my mother observed, flipping through the leather-bound menu. "Though I'm not familiar with many of these labels. Very boutique." Lisa, bless her heart, launched into an enthusiastic explanation of our wine program, how we partnered with small Oregon vineyards, how our sommelier personally selected each bottle to pair with our seasonal menu. My mother, Nodded politely, but I could see her eyes glazing over. She preferred wines with recognizable names, preferably French, definitely expensive enough to impress her country club friends. "And what's good here?" Brandon asked, not really paying attention to Lisa's response because he was already texting someone under the table. "Everything is excellent," Lisa said, with the kind of genuine enthusiasm that couldn't be faked. "The menu changes seasonally, but right now the duck breast with cherry gastrique is incredible, and the seafood risotto is probably our most popular dish." My father frowned at the prices. Even though he could afford anything on the menu, he had that particular expression he got when he thought something was overpriced. $38 for duck? "The portions are generous," Lisa assured him. "And the duck is locally sourced from a farm just outside of Hood River. Chef Tyler does amazing things with it." I tried not to react to the mention of Tyler's name. My family had no idea that Tyler Martinez was not just the head chef, but also my business partner, the brilliant mind behind our menu, the reason food. Critics had started taking notice of our little restaurant in the increasingly competitive Portland dining scene. We ordered our meals, and as Lisa walked away, my mother leaned forward with that conspiratorial look she got when she was about to share gossip. "So, Chloe, we have some news to share. That's why we wanted to have dinner together as a family. Finally, the real reason for this gathering." I waited, sipping my sparkling water and trying to prepare myself for whatever announcement was coming. "Brandon got the promotion," my father said, his chest puffing out with pride. "Senior associate at the firm. Youngest person in the company's history to reach that level." I looked at my brother, who was grinning with the satisfaction of someone who'd just won a prize he hadn't really worked for. Brandon had been at Morrison, Kelly and Associates for 3 years, a prestigious real estate development firm where my father had connections. The promotion wasn't entirely unearned. Brandon was charming and competent when he applied himself. But it certainly hadn't hurt that Richard Caldwell was golf buddies with 2 of the partners. "Congratulations," I said, and I meant it. Whatever my feelings about how he'd gotten there, Brandon had worked for this moment. "That's really wonderful." "It comes with a significant salary increase," my mother added, because in our family, success was always measured in dollars. "And they're putting him on the Riverfront project. Do you know how big that is, Chloe? How many important people he'll be working with?" I nodded appropriately, made the right sounds of admiration and excitement. This was how our family celebrations always went. Brandon achieved something, our parents celebrated, and I played the role of the supportive sister who was proud but not jealous, happy but not bitter about being perpetually in second place. Our appetizers arrived, beautifully plated small dishes that showcased Tyler's technical skill and artistic vision. The burrata with roasted peach and prosciutto looked like a painting, the colors bright against the white porcelain. The octopus carpaccio was delicate and perfect, each slice uniform, the accompaniments balanced and bright. My father poked at his octopus suspiciously. He was a meat and potatoes kind of man who viewed adventurous eating with the same skepticism he reserved for foreign cars and modern art. "It's very good," my mother said after a tentative bite, sounding surprised. "Though I'm not sure I'd order it again. It's quite chewy." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Brandon, meanwhile, was photographing his burrata from multiple angles, probably for his Instagram account where he documented his life as a young professional on the rise. Every meal was content. Every experience was a story to be shared with. His 1,000 followers who envied his seemingly effortless success. "So," my father said, cutting a piece of octopus with more force than necessary, "we were thinking this would be a good time to talk about your situation, Chloe." "My situation? Here we go." "What about my situation?" "Well, you're 26 now," my mother said gently, as if my age was a medical condition that required delicate handling. "And you've been between jobs for quite a while. We're starting to worry." between jobs. That was how they'd characterized my last 2 years, the period during which I'd been building Rosewood Bistro from the ground up. They thought I was unemployed, living off savings and pride, too stubborn to ask for help. "I'm doing fine," I said carefully. "Better than fine, actually." "Are you?" my father asked. "Because from where we're sitting, it looks like you're struggling. Living in that expensive apartment you can't afford, buying clothes you shouldn't be spending money on, pretending everything is okay when it's clearly not. The expensive apartment I couldn't afford, the clothes I shouldn't buy, the pretending." Each word was a small cut, precise and painful. "I'm not pretending anything," I said. "I'm genuinely doing well." Brandon looked up from his phone. "Come on, Chloe. We all know you've been having a tough time. There's no shame in admitting you need help. No shame in admitting I needed help. From the brother who'd never paid for anything himself, whose car, apartment, and probably this dinner would ultimately be subsidized by our parents in one way or another." Our main courses arrived, and the conversation paused while Lisa explained each dish. The duck breast was sliced perfectly, the meat pink and tender, accompanied by roasted root vegetables and that cherry gastrique that had become one of our signature touches. The seafood risotto was creamy and rich, studded with local Dungeness crab and Oregon Bay shrimp. My salmon was cooked exactly how I'd taught the kitchen staff, just barely opaque in the center, the skin crispy, the seasonal vegetables still bright and crisp. "This is actually quite good," my father admitted grudgingly, as if the quality of the food was a personal affront to his low expectations. "I told you it would be," Brandon said. "I read about this place online. They're supposed to be one of the up-and-coming spots in Portland. Very trendy." Trendy. As if that was both a compliment and a criticism, something to be acknowledged but not taken too seriously. My mother was picking at her risotto with the kind of careful precision that suggested she was monitoring every calorie. "It's very rich. Probably not the healthiest choice, but it's a special occasion." A special occasion, Brandon's promotion, yes, but also this intervention they'd clearly planned. This family meeting disguised as a celebration, designed to address my supposed failures while surrounded by the comfort of good food and public setting that would keep emotions in check. "So we've been talking," my father continued, cutting into his duck with surgical precision. "And we think it's time for you to consider coming to work for the family business." The family business. Morrison, Kelly and Associates, where my father was a partner and Brandon was the rising star. Where I would be the daughter and sister who finally came to her senses and accepted help from people who knew better. "We could start you in an entry-level position," my mother added. "Nothing too demanding while you get your feet under you. Maybe administrative work or assisting with staging projects. I know people who could train you." Entry-level. Administrative work, training. For someone who'd graduated cum laude with a business degree and had been running her own company for 2 years. "That's very generous," I said, keeping my voice level. "But I'm happy where I am." "Where you are?" Brandon laughed, not unkindly but with the kind of condescension that came so naturally to him. "Chloe, you don't have a job. You haven't had a real job since you left the marketing firm 18 months ago." The marketing firm, where I'd worked for 3 years after college, climbing the ladder at a mid-sized agency that specialized in restaurant and hospitality marketing. Where I'd learned everything I could about the food service industry, about branding and customer acquisition and profit margins. Where I'd made connections that helped me when I decided to strike out on my own. "I have work," I said. "I'm self-employed." "Doing what?" my father asked with the skeptical tone he used when Brandon tried to explain cryptocurrency or when my mother suggested they should try Thai food. "Consulting," I said, which was technically true. I consulted with myself every day about how to run my restaurant. "Consulting about what?" my mother pressed. "For whom?" How much are you making? Do you have benefits? A retirement plan? Questions that felt like arrows, each one designed to expose the supposedly precarious nature of my situation. Questions that assumed I was failing, that I was too proud to admit I needed help, that I was one missed rent payment away from having to move back home. The thing is, I could have told them the truth right then. I could have explained that I owned this restaurant, that I was the person who'd hired Lisa and trained her to describe our wine program with such passion. I could have mentioned that Tyler in the kitchen was my business partner, that the signature dishes they were enjoying were partly my creation, that the success they were witnessing was something I'd built from nothing. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the tone of their concern, which felt more like judgment than love. Maybe it was the assumption that I couldn't possibly be successful on my own terms, that my worth was measured only by traditional markers of achievement. Maybe it was the way they talked about helping me as if I was a charity case rather than a capable adult who'd chosen a different path. Or maybe it was just that I wanted to see how far they'd go, how deep their certainty about my failure really ran. "The thing is," my father said, setting down his fork and leaning forward with the serious expression he used for important business conversations, "we can't keep watching you struggle like this. It's time to be realistic about your situation." "My situation is fine," I repeated, but even as I said it, I could see they didn't believe me. "Chloe," my mother said softly, reaching across the table to pat my hand in a gesture that might have looked affectionate to outside observers but felt patronizing to me. "Sweetheart, we know you've been having trouble making ends meet. We know because we've been paying attention." Paying attention? What did that mean? Brandon cleared his throat. "We know about the credit card bills, the student loans, the apartment. That costs more than you can afford." My stomach dropped. "How do you know about any of that?" "When you put us down as emergency contacts," my father explained matter-of-factly, "certain information becomes available, especially when you miss payments." Miss payments. I hadn't missed any payments. My credit score was excellent. My student loans were current. My rent was always paid on time. What were they talking about? "I haven't missed any payments," said slowly. "Chloe," my mother said in that gentle tone people use when they're about to deliver bad news. "Honey, we know you got that notice from your landlord last month. About the late rent." Notice from my landlord. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. I hadn't received any notice from my landlord because I'd never been late with rent. Not once in the 2 years I'd lived there. And then it hit me. They'd been getting my mail somehow, or they thought they had, or someone had been feeding them information that wasn't true. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said. "I've never been late with rent." "It's okay to admit you're struggling," Brandon said. "We've all been there. Remember when I couldn't make my car payment in college? Mom and Dad helped me out. That's what family does." When Brandon couldn't make his car payment in college because he'd spent his allowance on spring break in Cabo. When our parents not only paid his car note but also increased his monthly allowance so it wouldn't happen. Again, "I'm not struggling," I said. But I could hear how defensive I sounded, how my voice was getting tighter with each exchange. "The thing is," my father said, and I could tell we were getting to the real point of this conversation, the reason they'd gathered us all here at this specific restaurant on this specific night. "We've made a decision as a family. We're going to help you whether you want help or not." Whether I wanted help or not. Like I was an intervention case, like I was spiraling out of control and needed to be saved from myself. "What does that mean?" I asked. My mother smiled with the kind of bright enthusiasm she usually reserved for her real estate clients. "We're going to pay for dinner tonight, all of it. Consider it our treat while we celebrate Brandon's promotion and discuss your new opportunities. Pay for dinner at the restaurant I owned. They were going to graciously pick up the check for the meal they were eating at my establishment while lecturing me about my supposed financial failures. And then," my father continued, We're going to help you get back on your feet. Brandon talked to his boss, and they have an opening in their administrative department. It's not glamorous, but it's steady work with good benefits. A place to start rebuilding. Rebuilding. As if my life was a house that had collapsed and needed to be constructed again from the foundation up. The salary isn't huge, Brandon added. Maybe $35,000 to start, but with your education and our connections, you could probably work your way up pretty quickly. $35,000 to start. At an entry-level administrative position. At the company where my father was a partner and my brother was a rising star. Where I would be the family charity case who finally accepted help. I looked around. The restaurant I'd built, at the servers I'd hired and trained, at the customers enjoying meals from the kitchen I'd helped design. I thought about the profit and loss statements locked in my office safe, showing healthy margins and steady growth. I thought about the review we'd gotten last month from Portland Monthly, calling us an emerging gem in the city's competitive dining scene. $35,000 to start. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but I don't need a job. I'm doing fine on my own. Chloe, my mother said with a sigh that suggested I was being unnecessarily difficult. We know you want to be independent. We raised you to be strong and self-sufficient. But sometimes independence means knowing when to accept help. Sometimes independence means knowing when to accept help. The irony was so thick I could have cut it with the steak knife next to my plate. Our server Lisa appeared at our table. With perfect timing, probably sensing the tension even though she couldn't hear our conversation. How is everything tasting tonight? Can I get anyone another drink? Everything is wonderful, my father said with the kind of forced cheerfulness people use when they're trying to prove they're having a good time. Really exceptional. You should be proud of this place. Lisa beamed with the kind of genuine pride that employees feel when they're part of something special. Thank you so much. I'll pass that along to our chef. He'll be thrilled to hear it. As she walked away, my mother lowered her voice. She seems sweet, but did you see that nose ring? Very unprofessional. The management here really should have standards about things like that. The management here. Me. I was the management here, and I'd specifically decided that our dress code would be more relaxed than traditional fine dining establishments, because I wanted our staff to feel comfortable expressing themselves. Lisa's nose ring was small and tasteful, and she was one of our best employees. I think she's great, I said. Professional appearance doesn't always mean conforming to outdated standards. Brandon shrugged. Sure, but when you're working in customer service, you have to think about what makes customers comfortable. Not everyone is as open-minded as you are, sis. Not everyone is as open-minded as you are. From the brother who'd never worked a service job in his life, whose idea of customer service was charming clients at company golf tournaments. Anyway, my father said, clearly wanting to get back to the main agenda. The point is that we're here to support you. The job offer is real, and it's available whenever you're ready to take it seriously. Whenever you're ready to take it seriously. As if everything I'd been doing for the past 2 years was just playing around, just killing time until I came to my senses and joined the family business. And in the meantime, my mother added, we want you to know that we're here for you financially. 2. If you need help with rent, or if you want to move somewhere more affordable, or if you just need some breathing room while you figure things out. Breathing room while I figured things out. They were offering to subsidize my life while I transitioned from whatever delusional independence I thought I had to the reality of working for them. The check came then, presented in a black leather folder that Lisa placed discreetly next to my father's elbow. He reached for it with the satisfaction of someone making a generous gesture, someone picking up the tab for his struggling daughter's expensive meal. I watched him open the folder and scan the total. His eyebrows went up slightly at the number. It was a good-sized check for 4 people, especially with the wine and the premium entrees they'd ordered. $287, he said, not quite whistling but close. That's quite a bit for dinner. It's a special occasion, my mother reminded him. And the food really was excellent. Brandon leaned over to look at the check. Wow, yeah, that's steep. Good thing we're celebrating my promotion, right? I definitely couldn't afford to eat here on my current salary. Current salary? The one that was about to increase substantially thanks to his promotion. The one that was already more than most people in Portland made in a year. My father pulled out his credit card, a black American Express that reflected his status in the financial world. Well, like your mother said, this is our treat. Consider it a celebration and an investment in your future, Chloe. An investment. In my future. He was paying for dinner at my restaurant while explaining how he was going to help me get my life back on track. Actually, I said quietly, I'd like to pay for my own meal. The table went silent. My parents exchanged one of those married couple looks that communicated entire conversations in a glance. Sweetheart, my mother said gently, that's very sweet, but we invited you. This is our treat. I insist, I said. I can afford to pay for my own dinner. Chloe, my father said with the patient tone he'd used when I was 12 and insisting I could ride my bike to school instead of getting a ride. We know you think you can afford it, but we also know what your financial situation really looks. Like, let us help you. Let us help you. Let us pay for your meal because we know you can't really afford it, despite what you claim about doing fine on your own. How much was my portion? I asked. Brandon consulted the check. Let's see. You had the salmon, which was $34 plus your share of tax and tip. Probably around $45 total. $45. For my portion of dinner at the restaurant I owned. I reached into my purse and pulled out my wallet, the leather one I'd bought myself when Rosewood Bistro turned its first profit. I counted out $50 in cash and placed it on the table. There, I said. My contribution. My family stared at the bills like I'd just performed a magic trick they couldn't quite figure out. Chloe, my mother said softly, honey, you don't need to prove anything to us. We're family. We take care of each other. You're absolutely right, I said. We do take care of each other. And I'm taking care of my own meal. The silence stretched uncomfortable and thick. Finally, my father picked up the $50 and tried to hand it back to me. Keep your money, he said. You'll need it more than we will. You'll need it more than we will. The final insult, delivered with a smile and wrapped in false generosity. That's when I realized they weren't going to stop. They weren't going to listen to me when I said I was doing fine. They weren't going to respect my choices or my independence or my right to live my life on my own terms. They had decided I was failing, and nothing I said was going to change their minds. So I smiled. Actually smiled. Probably for the first time all evening. You know what? I said, standing up from the booth. You're right. I do need to take care of myself. And I think it's time I started doing that more seriously. I walked away from the table, leaving them with their assumptions and their concern, and their black American Express card. I walked past the other diners, past the bar where the bartender was crafting cocktails with the house-made syrups we'd perfected over months of trial and error, past the host stand where Amanda was seating a young couple for what looked like a first date. I walked into my office, the small space behind the kitchen where I kept the paperwork that proved everything they thought they knew about my life was wrong. I unlocked the filing cabinet and pulled out a folder marked Business, Registration and Ownership Documents. When I walked back to table 12, my family was exactly where I'd left them, probably discussing my dramatic exit and what it meant for their intervention strategy. I forgot to give you something, I said, sliding back into the booth. Chloe, my mother started, if this is about the money. It's not about the money, I said. Well, actually, it is about money, but probably not in the way you think. I placed the folder on the table between the dessert menus and the check that was still waiting for my father's credit card. "What's this?" Brandon asked. "Open it," I said. My father opened the folder with the careful deliberation of someone who'd spent decades reviewing legal documents. I watched his face as he scanned the first page, saw the moment when his expression shifted from confusion to surprise to something that might have been shock. "This is a business registration," he said slowly. "For Rosewood Bistro," I added, helpfully. My mother leaned over to look at the documents. "I don't understand." "The owner is listed as—" My father paused, reading more carefully. "Chloe Alexandra Summers. That's you." "That's me," I confirmed. The silence that followed was different from the previous silences. This wasn't awkward or tense. This was the kind of silence that happens when people are trying to rearrange everything they thought they knew about reality. "You own this restaurant?" Brandon asked. "I own this restaurant." "Since when?" my mother demanded. "Since I opened it 2 years ago." 2 years ago. While they thought I was unemployed and struggling and too proud to ask for help, I was actually building something, creating jobs, serving customers, turning a profit, building a reputation in one of the most competitive industries in the city. "But," my father said, and I could see him trying to process this information, "but you said you were unemployed. You said you were doing consulting work." "I never said I was unemployed," I corrected. "You assumed I was unemployed. And I do consulting work. I consult with myself about how to run my business." My mother was flipping through the documents with increasing agitation. "This doesn't make sense. How could you afford to open a restaurant? Where did you get the money? Why didn't you tell us?" Where did I get the money? As if the only possible source of funding for my dreams would have been them. "I saved everything I earned at the marketing firm," I explained. "I took out a business loan. I found investors who believed in my concept. I worked 18-hour days for 6 months to get this place ready to open." "Investors?" my father asked, and I could hear the real estate developer in him calculating numbers, trying to figure out how much capital would be required for a restaurant of this size and quality. "Local business people who were looking for good investment opportunities in the Portland food scene," I said. "People who understood the market and believed in what I was trying to create." Brandon was looking around the restaurant with new eyes, taking in the full dining room, the busy kitchen visible through the pass window, the efficient service, the obvious success of the operation. "How much?" he started, then stopped. "How much what?" "How much do you make?" he asked bluntly. "More than $35,000, I said. My mother was still staring at the business registration like it was written in a foreign language. "I don't understand why you didn't tell us. We're your family. We could have helped you. We could have invested." Could have invested, could have helped, could have turned my independent venture into another family project where their money came, with strings and expectations and the subtle control that accompanied all their assistance. "I didn't need help," I said. "I wanted to do this myself." "But the risk," my father said, and now he was thinking like the businessman he was, calculating failure rates and market conditions and all the things that could go wrong. "Restaurants are notoriously difficult. The failure rate is enormous. You could have lost everything." "I could have," I agreed. "But I didn't." The waitress, my employee, appeared at the table again, probably wondering why we'd been sitting here so long without ordering dessert or asking for the check. "Is everything still going well?" Lisa asked. "Can I bring you anything else tonight?" My father looked up at her with an expression I'd never seen before. It took me a moment to realize what it was: respect. He was looking at her the way he looked at employees at successful businesses, with the acknowledgement that she was part of something well-run and profitable. "Actually," I said, "could you ask Tyler to come out for a moment? I'd like my family to meet him." Tyler appeared within minutes, wiping his hands on his apron and smiling with the easy confidence of someone who knew he belonged in whatever room he entered. At 32, he had the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. The quiet authority that came from years of working in professional kitchens where precision and leadership meant the difference between success and chaos. "Hey, Chloe," he said, then nodded politely to my family. "Everything going well out here?" "Tyler, I'd like you to meet my family. This is my father, Richard, my mother, Patricia, and my brother, Brandon. Everyone, this is Tyler Martinez, our head chef and my business partner." Business partner. I watched my family's faces as they processed this information, saw the moment when they realized that not only did I own this restaurant, but I had a partner, someone who'd believed in my vision, enough to tie his professional reputation to mine. Tyler extended his hand to my father first, a gesture of respect that didn't go unnoticed. "Pleasure to meet you, sir. Chloe's told me so much about her family." "Has she?" my mother asked, and there was an edge to her voice that suggested she was wondering exactly what I'd shared about them. "All good things," Tyler assured her with a diplomat's smile. "She's very proud of Brandon's success in real estate development, and she mentioned that you're in staging, Mrs. Summers. That must give you a great eye for spatial design." My mother brightened despite herself. Tyler had that effect on people. He could make anyone feel seen and valued within minutes of meeting them. It was part of what made him such an excellent front-of-house presence when needed, and part of why our kitchen staff was so loyal to him. "I do staging for high-end properties," she said, unconsciously straightening her posture. "It's all about understanding how people want to feel in a space." "That's exactly what we try to do here," Tyler said enthusiastically. "Creating an environment where people feel comfortable enough to really enjoy their meal, to have conversations, to celebrate." Chloe was very specific about the atmosphere she wanted when we were designing the dining room. Another piece of information that rearranged their understanding of my involvement in this place. I hadn't just bought an existing restaurant. I'd been part of creating it from the ground up. My father was studying Tyler with the same attention he gave to potential business partners. "How long have you two been working together?" "Since the beginning," Tyler said. "Chloe approached me when I was sous chef at Le Bernardin in Manhattan. She had this vision for what Portland's dining scene could become, and she needed someone who understood both classical technique and innovative approaches to local ingredients. Le Bernardin. My family knew that name, knew what it meant in the culinary world. Brandon's eyebrows went up slightly, and I could see him mentally revising his assessment of Tyler from some cook to serious professional. "You left New York to come here?" my mother asked, and there was genuine curiosity in her voice now. Tyler grinned. "Best decision I ever made. Chloe gave me the freedom to create a menu that reflects what I'm passionate about, and Portland has incredible access to fresh local ingredients. Plus, being part of building something from scratch has been incredibly rewarding." "What kind of numbers are you doing?" my father asked, slipping into business mode without realizing it. Tyler glanced at me, and I nodded. "We're consistently booked 3 weeks out for weekend reservations," he said. "We've been profitable since month 8, which is pretty unusual in this industry, and we just got reviewed by Portland Monthly. They called us the kind of neighborhood gem that makes you feel like you've discovered a secret. Profitable since month 8. Booked 3 weeks out. Reviewed by Portland Monthly." Each piece of information was another brick in the wall of evidence that I wasn't the struggling failure they'd assumed I was. "Well," Tyler said, checking his watch, "I should get back to the kitchen. We've got a full house tonight, and I want to make sure every plate that goes out is perfect. It was wonderful meeting you all." He squeezed my shoulder as he passed, a gesture of support that didn't go unnoticed by anyone at the table. After he was gone, the silence stretched long and uncomfortable. Finally, Brandon spoke. "So you've been running a successful restaurant?" For 2 years. Yes. And you never told us? No. Why? My mother asked, and for the first time that evening, she sounded genuinely hurt rather than just frustrated. Why would you keep something like this from us? We're your family. It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself since I made the decision to keep my business venture private. The answer was complicated, layered with years of family dynamics and my own insecurities, and the fear that their involvement would somehow diminish what I was trying to achieve. Because I wanted to do it myself, I said finally. I wanted to prove that I could build something without your help, without your money, without your connections. I wanted to succeed or fail, based on my own efforts. But we could have supported you, my father said. We could have provided additional capital, introduced you to investors, helped you navigate the licensing and regulatory requirements. I know you could have, I said, but I didn't want that. I wanted this to be mine. Mine. The word hung in the air like a challenge, like an accusation, like a declaration of independence that they weren't sure how to interpret. And what if you'd failed? My mother asked. What if the restaurant had gone under? Would you have come to us then? It was a question I'd considered during the long nights when I was putting together my business plan, when I was lying awake, worrying about cash flow and competition, and the 1,000 things that could go wrong. Would I have swallowed my pride and asked for help if everything had fallen apart? I don't know, I admitted. Maybe, but I would have tried everything else first. Brandon was still looking around the restaurant with new eyes, taking in the details he'd missed before. The quality of the lighting, the thoughtful arrangement of tables, the way the open kitchen created energy without noise, the fact that every table was occupied and the servers moved with the efficiency that came from good training and clear systems. This place must be worth. He started, then stopped himself. More than my Pearl District apartment, I said dryly. My father leaned back in the booth, and I could see him processing everything he'd learned. You're telling us that while we thought you were unemployed and struggling to pay rent, you were actually running a profitable business that employs. He paused, counting the staff he could see. 15 people? 17, actually. We have weekend hosts and a pastry chef who comes in mornings. 17 employees. 17 people whose livelihoods depended partly on decisions I made, on the success of the business I'd built. 17 people who showed up every day to work for a restaurant that my family had just spent an hour assuming I couldn't afford to eat at. I need another drink, my mother said faintly. Lisa appeared as if summoned, probably sensing the shift in energy at our table. Can I get anyone another round? Actually, I said, standing up again. Could you bring us a bottle of the 2018 Willamette Valley Pinot Noir? The one from Archery Summit. Lisa nodded and headed toward the wine storage, and my mother looked at me with surprise. You know their wine list. I created their wine list, I corrected. I spent 3 months visiting local vineyards, tasting with our sommelier, building relationships with winemakers. That Pinot Noir is one of my personal favorites. Our sommelier, another detail that spoke to the level of sophistication and professionalism of the operation I'd built. Most casual restaurants didn't have sommeliers. Most new restaurants couldn't afford to spend 3 months curating their wine program. When Lisa returned with the bottle, she presented it to me for approval, a gesture that would have seemed odd if my family didn't now understand that I was the owner. I nodded, and she opened it with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. This is from a small family vineyard about 40 minutes south of here, I explained, as Lisa poured. The owner, Maria Gonzalez, is a first-generation winemaker whose family immigrated from Mexico 30 years ago. She's doing incredible things with sustainable farming practices. I was sharing more than information about wine. I was sharing the values that had guided my business decisions. The commitment to supporting local producers and family-owned businesses, the belief that a restaurant could be more than just a place to eat. My father tasted the wine thoughtfully. This is excellent, complex but not overwrought. Maria would be thrilled to hear that, I said. She's passionate about making wines that complement food rather than competing with it. Brandon was quiet, which was unusual for him. Finally, he looked up from his wine glass. I'm trying to figure out why you let us think you were broke. I never said I was broke, I pointed out. You assumed I was broke. But you let us assume it. You let us worry about you. You let us think you needed help. He was right, and I knew it. I had let them worry. I had allowed their assumptions to stand uncorrected, had even found a certain satisfaction in their concern, in being underestimated. Maybe I wanted to see what you really thought of me, I said quietly. The words came out more honestly than I'd intended, revealing something I hadn't quite admitted to myself until that moment. Maybe part of keeping my success secret had been a test, a way of discovering who my family thought I was when they believed I had nothing to offer them. What do you mean? My mother asked. I mean, I wanted to know if you'd love me when you thought I was failing. I wanted to see if you'd respect me when you believed I had nothing. I wanted to understand what your support looked like when it wasn't tied to my success. The silence that followed was different again, heavier with recognition and regret. Chloe, my father said finally, we've always loved you. Success or failure, we're your family. Are you? I asked. Because tonight, before you knew about this place, you spent an hour explaining to me why I was a disappointment. You offered me an entry-level job making $35,000 because you assumed I couldn't do better on my own. You tried to pay for my dinner because you thought I couldn't afford it. Each point was delivered calmly, without anger, but I could see them landing like physical blows. We were trying to help, my mother said defensively. Were you? Or were you trying to make yourselves feel better about having a daughter who didn't fit your definition of success? It was harsh, but it was also true. Their help had felt more like rescue than support, more like charity than love. Brandon set down his wine glass. Okay, I get that we made assumptions, but can you understand why? You've been secretive for 2 years. You never talk about work. You never invite us to see where you live. You never share details about your life. What were we supposed to think? He had a point. I had been secretive, had kept them at arm's length, had shared almost nothing about my real life. You were supposed to trust me, I said. You were supposed to believe that I was capable of taking care of myself. But how could we trust what we couldn't see? My mother asked. How could we believe in your success when you hid it from us? Another fair point. Trust worked both ways, and I hadn't given them much to work with. Lisa appeared at our table, again this time with a small plate of dessert samples. Compliments of the chef, she said. Tyler thought you might like to try some of our signature desserts. The plate held 4 small portions, a chocolate tart with salted caramel, a lavender creme brulee, a seasonal fruit galette, and what looked like a deconstructed lemon meringue pie. Each dessert was presented with the same attention to detail as our main courses, small works of art that demonstrated the level of skill in our kitchen. These look incredible, my mother said. And for the first time all evening, her enthusiasm seemed genuine rather than polite. I watched my family taste the desserts, saw their expressions of surprise and pleasure, noticed the way they lingered over each bite. These were people who dined at expensive restaurants regularly, who had high standards for food and service, and they were clearly impressed by what they were experiencing. The lemon dessert is extraordinary, my father said. The balance of sweet and tart is perfect. Tyler's been working on that one for months, I said. He wanted to create something that felt nostalgic but also sophisticated, familiar but surprising. He's incredibly talented, Brandon admitted. How did you convince someone with his credentials to partner with you? It was an honest question, but it revealed something about how he saw me, as someone who would need to convince a real professional to take me seriously. I didn't convince him of anything, I said. I offered him something he wanted: creative freedom, profit sharing, and the opportunity to build something meaningful. Tyler was tired of working in other people's kitchens, following other people's visions. He wanted to be part of creating something new. Profit sharing? My father asked with the sharp attention of someone who understood business structures. Tyler owns 20% of the restaurant, I said. Our head server Kelly owns 5%. I believe in sharing success with the people who help create it. 20%, 5%. These weren't just employees. They were stakeholders. People who had real investment in the success of the business. That's unusual in the restaurant industry, my father observed. Most things about the restaurant industry are broken, I said. Low wages, high turnover, unsustainable working conditions. I wanted to do things differently. What kind of wages do you pay? My mother asked. Starting servers make $18 an hour plus tips. Kitchen staff starts at $22. Everyone gets health insurance after 90 days, and we have a profit-sharing program that pays out quarterly bonuses when we hit our targets. $18 an hour for servers, $22 for kitchen staff, health insurance, profit sharing. These were wages that allowed people to live decently in Portland, to have stability, to build careers rather than just collect paychecks. Brandon was calculating in his head. That must significantly impact your profit margins. In the short term, yes, I agreed. But we have almost zero turnover, which saves money on training and hiring. Our staff is incredibly motivated because they know their success is tied to the restaurant's success. And word gets around in the industry. We attract the best people because they know we treat employees well. It was a business philosophy that extended beyond just treating people fairly. It was about building something sustainable, something that could thrive long-term because it was based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. My father was looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something that might have been professional respect mixed with personal confusion. You've built something impressive here, he said finally. Thank you. But I still don't understand why you felt you had to do it in secret. It was the question that kept coming back, the heart of the tension between us. Why had I chosen to build this life in isolation rather than sharing it with the people who claimed to love me? Because I needed to know who I was without you, I said. I needed to discover what I was capable of when I wasn't trying to meet your expectations or live up to your standards or prove that I deserved your approval. Without you. The words seemed to echo in the space between us. Are you saying we held you back? My mother asked, and there was genuine pain in her voice. I'm saying I needed to find out who I was when I wasn't somebody's daughter or somebody's sister. When I was just Chloe, making my own decisions, taking my own risks, creating my own definition of success. Creating my own definition of success. That was the key, really. Their definition of success was traditional, measurable, tied to institutions and salaries and recognition from established systems. My definition was more personal, more about autonomy and creativity, and building something that reflected my values. And what did you discover? Brandon asked quietly. I looked around the restaurant again, taking in the full dining room, the satisfied customers, the efficient service, the warm atmosphere that we'd worked so hard to create. I discovered that I'm stronger than I thought I was. I'm more creative than I knew. I'm better at leading people than I expected. And I'm capable of building something meaningful without anyone's permission or approval. Without anyone's permission or approval. Another phrase that seemed to carry more weight than its words should. But we would have given you our approval, my mother said. We would have supported you if you'd told us what you were doing. Would you? I asked. Would you really have supported me quitting a stable marketing job to open a restaurant with someone you'd never met, using money I'd saved and borrowed, in an industry with a 90% failure rate? The question hung in the air because we all knew the answer. They would have tried to talk me out of it. They would have offered alternatives, suggested safer paths, recommended waiting until I had more experience or more capital or more certainty about the outcome. We would have worried, my father admitted. But we would have come around. Maybe, I said. But I didn't want to have to convince you. I didn't want to spend my energy defending my choices or managing your anxiety about my decisions. I wanted to focus all my attention on making this work. And it did work, Brandon said, and there was something like admiration in his voice. It did work. So what happens now? My mother asked. Do we go back to pretending we don't know about this? Do we keep our distance so you can maintain your independence? It was a fair question, and one I didn't have a complete answer to. The secret was out now. The careful separation I'd maintained between my family life and my business life was over, but I wasn't sure what came next. I don't know, I said honestly. I guess we figure out how to have a relationship that includes all of who I am, not just the parts that make you comfortable. All of who I am, the successful business owner and the struggling daughter, the confident leader and the uncertain young woman, the person who'd built something impressive and the person who still sometimes felt like she was pretending to be an adult. Lisa appeared at our table one more time, carrying the small black folder that held our check. She placed it next to my father's elbow, just as she had earlier, but this time the gesture carried different weight. My father reached for it automatically, then paused. Should I, It's up to you, I said. But you should know that as the owner, I could comp the entire meal if I wanted to. Comp the entire meal. Another demonstration of the power dynamics that had shifted so completely over the course of the evening. He opened the folder and looked at the total again, $287. But now he was seeing it differently. Now it wasn't just an expensive dinner that proved his daughter couldn't manage money responsibly. Now it was revenue, for a business I'd built, profit that would help pay for the wages I offered my employees and the quality ingredients Tyler used in his kitchen. I'd like to pay, he said finally. Not because I think you need help, but because I'd like to support what you've built here. Support what you've built here. It was a small thing, paying for dinner, but it represented a recognition of my accomplishment, an acknowledgement that this place was worth supporting. Thank you, I said. He placed his credit card in the folder, and Lisa took it away to process the payment. While we waited, my family looked around the restaurant with new understanding, seeing it not as an expensive venue they'd chosen for dinner, but as something I'd created from nothing. The lighting is really well done, my mother said, and I could hear her professional eye for design in the observation. Warm, but not dim, bright enough for conversation but soft enough for intimacy. We worked with a lighting designer who specializes in restaurant environments, I said. I wanted people to feel like they looked good here, like the space enhanced their experience rather than just containing it. And the acoustics are excellent, Brandon added. You can have a conversation without shouting, but it doesn't feel sterile. These were details I'd spent months obsessing over, small elements that contributed to the overall atmosphere, but that most customers never consciously noticed. Hearing my family recognize and appreciate these choices felt like a form of validation I hadn't realized I wanted. Lisa returned with the credit card and receipt, and my father signed with the flourish of someone who was genuinely happy to be spending money. Will you give our compliments to the chef? He asked Lisa. Everything was exceptional. Absolutely, she said with a smile. He'll be thrilled to hear that, and thank you so much for coming in tonight. After she walked away, we sat for a moment in the kind of comfortable silence that had been missing all evening. The revelation was over, the shock absorbed, the new reality accepted, if not yet fully understood. "So," my mother said finally, "I suppose this means you won't be needing that entry-level position." I laughed, actually laughed for the first time all night. "No, I think I'll stick with what I'm doing." "Good," my father said, "because based on what I've seen tonight, you'd be overqualified." Overqualified. From the man who'd spent the first hour of dinner explaining why I needed their help to get my life back on track. We gathered our things and prepared to leave, but as we walked toward the door, Tyler emerged from the kitchen one more time. "How was everything?" he asked, directing the question to my family but catching my eye. "Outstanding," my father said, extending his hand again. "Truly exceptional food and service." "I'm glad you enjoyed it," Tyler said. "Chloe's family is always welcome here." Always welcome here. At the restaurant they hadn't known I owned until an hour ago, but which would now be part of how they understood my life. As we reached the front door, Amanda looked up from the host stand with a smile. "Have a wonderful evening, everyone. We hope to see you again soon." "I think you will," my mother said, and there was something in her voice that suggested she meant it. Outside, the Portland evening had turned cool and misty, the kind of weather that made the warm light spilling from restaurant windows look especially inviting. We stood on the sidewalk for a moment, none of us quite ready to end the evening, despite everything that had happened. "I'm parked across the street," my father said. "Can we give you a ride home?" "Actually, I think I'll walk," I said. "I live close by, and I like walking through the neighborhood at night." I like walking through the neighborhood at night. Another small detail about my life that they were learning. Another piece of the person I'd become without their knowledge. "Will you?" My mother started, then stopped. "Will you call us? Not because we're worried about you, but because we'd like to stay in touch with this version of you." This version of you, the successful, independent, accomplished version that they were still adjusting to. "Yes," I said. "I'll call." We exchanged goodbyes, awkward hugs that carried the weight of everything that had changed between us. As I watched them walk away, I realized that the evening had ended differently than any family dinner in my memory. Not with me feeling diminished or defensive, but with a sense that something new was beginning. I turned and looked back at Rosewood Bistro, at the warm light glowing through the windows, at the people inside enjoying meals that my team had prepared. Tomorrow morning I would come in early to review the previous night's numbers, to check in with the kitchen staff, to plan for the busy weekend ahead. I would continue building something I was proud of, something that reflected my values and my vision. But tonight, for the first time in 2 years, my family knew who I really was. The secret was out, the careful separation was over, and whatever came next would have to include all of me. As I walked home through the quiet streets of my neighborhood, I realized I was looking forward to finding out what that might look like. The morning after the dinner that changed everything started like any other Monday at Rosewood Bistro, except for the knot of anticipation in my stomach that had nothing to do with restaurant operations. I arrived at 6:30, 2 hours before. We opened for lunch service, partly because I always came in early, and partly because I needed the familiar ritual of checking inventory and reviewing weekend receipts to ground myself after the emotional whirlwind of the previous evening. The restaurant felt different in the early morning light, quieter and more intimate without the energy of dinner service. Tyler was already in the kitchen, as he always was, prepping vegetables for the lunch menu with the methodical precision that had made him indispensable. The coffee was brewing, filling the space with the rich aroma that would soon draw our morning prep crew. "How'd the rest of your evening go?" Tyler asked without looking up from the onions he was dicing. He'd been working with me long enough to read my moods, to understand when family dynamics had left me unsettled. "Complicated," I said, pouring myself coffee from the industrial machine we used for staff. "But probably necessary." "The truth usually is," he said with the kind of philosophical observation that came naturally to him. Tyler had a way of cutting through emotional complexity to find the essential core of any situation. I settled into my office with the weekend's receipts and my laptop, ready to dive into the numbers that would tell me how we'd performed over our busiest service period. Rosewood Bistro had been consistently profitable for 18 months, but I still felt a flutter of anxiety every Monday morning when I calculated our weekend revenue. The restaurant business was unforgiving, and success could evaporate as quickly as it appeared. But the numbers were good. Better than good, actually. We'd served 347 covers over Friday and Saturday nights, with an average check of $68 per person. Our wine sales were up 12% from the previous month, and we'd had 0 returns to the kitchen, which spoke to the consistency Tyler had built into our operations. I was deep in analyzing our cost ratios when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my mother's name, and I felt that familiar tightening in my chest that always accompanied unexpected contact from my family. But this time, the anxiety was mixed with curiosity. What would our first conversation be like now that they knew the truth about my life? "Good morning, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Chloe, honey," she said, and there was something different in her tone, a hesitancy that wasn't usually there. "I hope I'm not calling too early. I know you probably have a lot to do at the restaurant." At the restaurant, the acknowledgement of where I was and what I was doing felt like a small miracle. "It's fine," I said. "I'm just going over weekend numbers. How did you do?" she asked, and the question seemed genuine rather than perfunctory. "Really well, actually. One of our best weekends yet." "That's wonderful." She paused, and I could hear her searching for the right words. "Chloe, I called because I wanted to apologize. Not just for last night, but for the assumptions we've been making about your life. We were wrong, and I'm sorry. An apology." From my mother, who rarely admitted error and almost never apologized for anything more significant than showing up late to lunch. "Thank you," I said carefully. "That means a lot. I also wanted to ask if you might have time for coffee this week. Just the two of us. I'd like to learn more about what you've built, and I think there are some things I should probably explain about why we reacted the way we did. Coffee with my mother to discuss my business and our relationship." 6 months ago, such a conversation would have been unimaginable. "I'd like that," I said, and realized I meant it. "How about Wednesday afternoon? I know a place in the Pearl District that's supposed to be very good." The Pearl District. My neighborhood, where she'd probably never spent time before because she'd assumed I couldn't afford to live there. "Actually," I said, "why don't you come here? I can give you a tour of the restaurant during the afternoon lull, and we can sit in the dining room. I think you'd like to see the place when it's quiet." "Are you sure? I don't want to interfere with your work." "You won't be interfering. Wednesday afternoons are usually slow, and I'd enjoy showing you around." After we hung up, I sat in my office for a long moment, processing the strangeness of having made plans to show my mother around my restaurant. For 2 years, I'd kept these worlds completely separate, and now they were beginning to merge in ways I wasn't sure how to navigate. Tyler appeared in my office doorway with a plate of the breakfast sandwich he'd been experimenting with for our potential brunch menu. "Try this," he said, setting the plate in front of me. "I think I've finally got the hollandaise right." The sandwich was perfect, the kind of elevated comfort food that exemplified our approach to cuisine. Local eggs from a farm outside Hood, river, house-cured bacon, avocado, and that hollandaise that Tyler had been perfecting for weeks, all on bread from a bakery 3 blocks away. "This is incredible," I said after the first bite. "When do you want to launch brunch service?" "I was thinking we could start weekends in October, once the summer tourist season calms down and we can focus on building a local customer base." We spent the next hour talking through the logistics of adding brunch service, the additional staffing we'd need, the equipment purchases that would be required, the marketing strategy to introduce a new service period. It was the kind of operational planning that had become second nature to us. But today I found myself wondering what my family would think of these conversations, whether they would understand the complexity of decisions that went into running a successful restaurant. The lunch prep crew arrived at 9, and the familiar rhythm of service preparation began. Vegetables were chopped, proteins were seasoned and portioned, stocks were tasted and adjusted. I moved between the kitchen and the dining room, checking that everything was ready for the 11:30 opening, watching my team work with the efficiency that came from months of practice and clear communication. At 11:15, Amanda unlocked the front door and flipped the sign from closed to open. Our first customers of the day were already waiting, a business lunch that had become a weekly tradition. 2 women from a nearby law firm who always ordered the same salads and always left generous tips. "Good morning, ladies," Amanda said with genuine warmth. "Your usual table?" I watched from behind the host stand as our lunch service began, noting the small details that contributed to our success. The way Amanda remembered regular customers' preferences, the efficiency with which our servers moved through their opening tasks, the consistent timing that allowed the kitchen to send out perfect plates even during busy periods. By noon, we had a steady stream of customers, a mix of business lunches and casual diners who appreciated what we offered. I moved through the dining room, checking on tables, ensuring that everyone's experience met our standards, feeling the satisfaction that came from seeing something you'd built functioning exactly as intended. One of our regular customers, a food blogger who'd given us a glowing review 6 months earlier, flagged me down as I passed her table. "Chloe," she said, "I just wanted to tell you that the soup today is extraordinary. Whatever Tyler is doing, with that squash, it's perfect for this weather." "I'll pass that along to him," I said. "He's been working on seasonal soups for the fall menu." "Well, tell him he nailed it. This is the kind of dish that makes people remember why they love coming here." As she spoke, I realized that this was what I'd been protecting when I kept my family separate from my business life. These relationships with customers who appreciated what we were trying to achieve, this environment where creativity and quality were valued above traditional markers of success, this sense of building something meaningful in a community that supported independent businesses. The lunch service continued smoothly, and by 2:30, the dining room had emptied except for a few lingering customers nursing coffee and working on laptops. This was my favorite time of day at the restaurant, the quiet period between services when I could walk through the space and appreciate what we'd created. My phone buzzed with a text from Brandon. "Hey, can we talk? I've been thinking about last night and I owe you an apology." Brandon wanting to apologize was even more surprising than my mother's morning call. My brother rarely admitted fault, and he almost never initiated difficult conversations. I called him back, and he answered on the first ring. "Chloe, thanks for calling back. I know you're probably busy, but I wanted to say something while it was still fresh in my mind." "I'm listening." "I was an ass last night, not just about the job offer thing, but about the way I talked to you, the assumptions I made. I realize now that I've been talking down to you for years, treating you like you couldn't figure things out on your own. Treating you like you couldn't figure things out on your own. It was an accurate assessment, and hearing him acknowledge it was both validating and painful." "Why?" I asked. "Why did you think that about me?" He was quiet for a moment, and I could hear him struggling with how to answer honestly. "I think because it made me feel better about myself," he said finally. "If you were struggling, then my success felt more meaningful. If you needed help, then I was the one who had it together. It was selfish, and it was wrong, and I'm sorry." It was a more insightful and honest response than I'd expected from Brandon, and it revealed something about our family dynamics that I'd never fully understood before. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "The thing is," he continued, "what you've built is actually incredible. I've been thinking about it all morning, and I keep coming back to how impressive it is that you did this yourself, The restaurant is beautiful. The food was amazing, and you clearly know what you're doing. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you. From Brandon, who'd been the golden child, the one whose achievements were always celebrated while mine were overlooked or minimized. Thank you, I said, and felt tears threatening for the first time since the previous evening. Can I ask you something? He said. Sure. Are you happy? I mean, genuinely happy with the choices you've made? It was a question that cut to the heart of everything, past the business success and the financial independence to the emotional reality of the life I'd built. Yes, I said without hesitation. I'm happier than I've ever been. This place, this work, this team, it feels like what I was meant to be doing. Good, he said. That's all that matters, really. After we hung up, I sat in the empty dining room and tried to process the morning's conversations. In the span of a few hours, both my mother and my brother had reached out to apologize and express genuine interest in my life. It felt like the beginning of something new, though I wasn't sure yet what that might look like. Tyler emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron and looking around the quiet dining room. Good lunch service, he said. The new soup was a hit. 3 people asked for the recipe. That's always a good sign, I said. People don't ask for recipes unless they're genuinely impressed. He settled into the chair across from me, something we often did during the afternoon lull to debrief the day and plan for evening service. So, he said, how are you feeling about last night? Any regrets about telling them? It was a fair question. I'd spent 2 years carefully maintaining the separation between my family and my professional life, and now that barrier was gone forever. No regrets, I said. It was time. I just hope I can figure out how to have them in my life, without letting them take over my life. You will, Tyler said with the confidence of someone who'd watched me navigate challenges before. You've got good boundaries, and you know what you want. Just because they know about this place doesn't mean they get to run it. Just because they know about this place doesn't mean they get to run it. It was a reminder I probably needed to hear, a recognition that knowledge and control were different things. My mom wants to come in Wednesday afternoon, I said. She wants a tour and to learn more about the business. That's good, Tyler said. She seemed genuinely interested last night, once she got over the shock. Were you nervous? Meeting? Them, I mean. Tyler considered the question. A little. They're important to you, so I wanted them to understand what we're doing here. But mostly I was curious. You've kept them so separate from this part of your life that I wondered what they'd be like. And what did you think? I think they love you, but they don't understand you very well. And I think last night might be the beginning of them trying to understand better. Love but don't understand. It was probably the most accurate assessment of my family relationships I'd ever heard. The afternoon prep crew arrived at 3, and the restaurant began its transformation from lunch, service to dinner preparation. The energy shifted, became more focused and intense as we prepared for our busiest service of the week. Monday evenings were typically quieter than weekends, but we still expected to serve about 150 covers, and every plate needed to meet our standards, regardless of how busy we were. I spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing reservations, checking wine inventory, and working on the marketing calendar for October. We were planning a wine dinner featuring exclusively Oregon producers, and I wanted to make sure we attracted the right audience, people who would appreciate both the food and the educational component of the evening. At 5:30, I changed into the black dress and comfortable shoes I wore for dinner service, when I spent most of my time in the dining room greeting customers and ensuring that every table's experience exceeded their expectations. It was a role that combined hospitality with business development, relationship building with quality control. The evening service began promptly at 6, and within an hour we had a full dining room. I moved between tables, welcoming regular customers, and introducing myself to first-time visitors, always watching for opportunities to enhance someone's experience or address potential problems before they became complaints. At 7:15, I noticed a familiar face at table 6. It was Maria Gonzalez, the winemaker whose Pinot Noir we'd featured the night before, dining with someone I didn't recognize. I approached their table with genuine pleasure. "Maria, what a wonderful surprise! How are you?" "Chloe," she said, standing to give me a warm hug. "I had to come try the food everyone's talking about. This is my sister Carmen, who's visiting from California." Carmen looked up with the kind of smile that suggested Maria had been talking about our restaurant. "Maria's been raving about this place for months. She says you're one of the few restaurant owners who really understands wine." "Maria makes it easy," I said. "Her wines are so food-friendly that they pair beautifully with almost everything Tyler creates." We chatted for a few minutes about the harvest season and the challenges of small-scale winemaking, the kind of conversation that reminded me why I loved working with local producers. These weren't just business relationships. They were partnerships with people who shared similar values about quality and craftsmanship. As I walked away from their table, I realized that this was another aspect of my life that my family didn't understand yet. The network of relationships I'd built with farmers and winemakers and other restaurant owners, the sense of community that existed within Portland's food scene, the way supporting each other's businesses created opportunities for everyone to succeed. The evening continued smoothly with consistent timing from the kitchen and attentive service from our floor staff. At 8:30, during the brief lull between first seating and late diners, my phone rang. The caller ID showed my father's number, which was unusual. He rarely called me directly, preferring to communicate through my mother. "Hi, Dad," I said, stepping into the quieter area near the host stand. "Chloe, I hope I'm not interrupting your dinner service." "It's fine. We're between waves right now. What's up?" I wanted to call because I've been thinking about our conversation last night, and I realized there's something I should tell you. Something he should tell me. I braced myself for whatever revelation was coming. "Your mother and I have been talking, and we think we owe you an explanation for why we reacted the way we did when we thought you were struggling." "Okay," I said carefully. "The truth is, we were scared. Not just worried about your financial situation, but scared that we'd failed as parents, that somehow we hadn't given you the tools or the confidence to succeed on your own. We'd failed as parents." It wasn't an admission I'd expected from my father, who rarely questioned his own decisions or methods. "When we thought you were having trouble," he continued, "it felt like proof that we hadn't prepared you properly for adult life. So instead of trusting that you were capable of figuring things out, we jumped into rescue mode." Rescue mode. It was an accurate description of their behavior, the way they'd rush to offer solutions without first understanding the actual problem. "But clearly," my father said, "you didn't need rescuing. You were doing exactly what we should have hoped. You'd do, building something meaningful based on your own vision and values." Building something meaningful based on your own vision and values. It was perhaps the most understanding thing my father had ever said about my choices. "Thank you for telling me that," I said. "It helps me understand why you've been so concerned. I also wanted to ask if you'd be open to having lunch sometime this week. I'd like to learn more about your business, maybe understand some of the challenges you've faced that we didn't know about." Lunch with my father to discuss my business challenges. Another conversation that would have been unimaginable just 24 hours earlier. "I'd like that," I said. "How about Thursday? We're closed for lunch service that day, so I could meet you somewhere." "Actually," he said, "I was wondering if we could meet at your restaurant. I'd like to see it when it's not busy, to get a better sense of what you've created." My father wanting to see my restaurant during a quiet period, to understand what I'd built without the distraction of dinner service energy. "That would be great," I said. "Come by around 1:30 and I'll make sure Tyler prepares something." special for us. After we hung up, I stood for a moment in the relative quiet near the host stand, watching my dining room full of happy customers enjoying meals that my team had prepared. The irony wasn't lost on me that 24 hours after my family had assumed I couldn't afford to eat at an expensive restaurant, they were all making plans to visit the restaurant I owned. Tyler appeared beside me, probably noting my thoughtful expression. "Everything okay?" he asked. "More than okay," I said. "My father wants to have lunch here Thursday. He wants to understand the business better." "That's progress," Tyler said with a smile. "Want me to plan something that will really impress him?" "Just be yourself," I said. "Cook what you're passionate about. I think he'll appreciate getting to see the real operation, not a special performance." The last wave of dinner customers began arriving at 9, mostly couples looking for a late, romantic meal or business associates finishing deals over wine and dessert. I continued my circuit through the dining room, ensuring that every table received the attention they deserved, that every guest left feeling like their evening had been special. At 10:30, as the last customers lingered over coffee and the kitchen began breaking down for the night, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed since the previous evening. 24 hours ago, my family had seen me as someone who needed their help to get her life together. Now they were actively seeking to understand and appreciate what I'd accomplished. The shift felt significant, but I also knew it was just the beginning. Learning to have my family in my life without compromising my independence would require ongoing navigation, clear boundaries, and honest communication. But for the first time in years, I felt optimistic about the possibility of building relationships with them that included all of who I was. As the dining room emptied and my staff completed their closing tasks, I realized that tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, both in my business and in my family relationships. But tonight, I felt proud of what I'd built and hopeful about what might come next. The restaurant was quiet now, except for the sounds of final cleanup, the dishwasher running, chairs being stacked on tables, the cash register being balanced. It was the peaceful end to another successful service, another day of building something meaningful in a community that appreciated what we offered. I locked the front door behind me and walked home through the misty Portland evening, thinking about Wednesday's coffee with my mother and Thursday's lunch with my father. For 2 years, I'd protected this life I'd built by keeping it separate from my family. Now I was about to discover what it might look like to share it with them. The thought was both exciting and terrifying, but mostly it felt like the natural next step in becoming fully myself, the person who could be both a successful business owner and a daughter, both an independent adult and a member of a family that was learning to love her for who she actually was rather than who they thought she should be. Wednesday afternoon arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made Portland feel like the most beautiful city in the world. I spent the morning handling administrative tasks in my office, reviewing vendor contracts and approving the final menu for our upcoming wine dinner. But my attention kept drifting to the clock. My mother would arrive at 2 o'clock for what would be our first real conversation about my business, and I found myself both eager and nervous about sharing this space with her. At 1:30, I walked through the restaurant one final time, seeing it through her eyes. The afternoon light streaming through our large windows created the warm, inviting atmosphere I'd envisioned when we first designed the space. The exposed brick walls showcased local artwork that rotated monthly, supporting emerging artists while adding visual interest to the dining room. The open kitchen concept allowed diners to glimpse the controlled creativity that happened during service, connecting them to the craft behind their meals. Tyler was using the quiet afternoon to experiment with a new sauce reduction, and the kitchen filled with the rich aroma of wine and herbs simmering together. Our afternoon prep crew worked methodically, preparing vegetables for evening service, with the kind of focused attention that had become our standard. "She's going to love this place," Kelly said, emerging from the server station where she'd been organizing wine glasses. Kelly had become more than just our head server over the past year. She was my right hand during service, someone whose judgment I trusted completely when it came to reading customers and managing the front of house. I hope so, I said. It's strange, introducing my mother to something that's been such a huge part of my life for 2 years. It's like bringing someone into your home, Kelly observed. Except this home employs 17 people and serves 300 customers a week. At exactly 2 o'clock, I saw my mother's car pull up outside. Through the window, I watched her sit for a moment, studying the exterior of the restaurant with the same careful attention she brought to every space she encountered. Her background in staging high-end properties had given her an eye for design details that most people missed, and I wondered what she was noticing about our storefront, our signage, the way we'd integrated ourselves into the neighborhood. Amanda greeted my mother at the door with professional warmth, and I felt a surge of pride watching the interaction. This was what good hospitality looked like. Genuine welcome without being overly familiar. Attentive service that anticipated needs. Without being intrusive. "Mom," I said, approaching the host stand. "Welcome to Rosewood Bistro." She looked around the dining room with obvious appreciation, taking in the thoughtful details that created our atmosphere. "Chloe, this is absolutely beautiful. The lighting, the layout, the way you can see into the kitchen, it's so well conceived." Coming from someone whose business involved making spaces feel inviting and functional, this was high praise indeed. "Would you like the full tour first, or should we sit and talk?" "Tour first, definitely. I want to understand how all of this works." I led her through the dining room, explaining our table configuration and how we'd designed the space to accommodate both intimate conversations and larger groups. I showed her the bar area, where our bartender crafted cocktails using house-made syrups and locally sourced spirits, and explained how the bar menu complemented our food offerings while serving its own purpose during happy hour and late evening. "The flow is excellent," she said, and I could hear her professional assessment in the observation. "Servers can move efficiently between tables, but customers don't feel like they're in a highway. That's harder to achieve than people realize." We moved into the kitchen, where Tyler was plating a sample of the afternoon's experiment for us to taste. The sauce he'd been working on accompanied perfectly seared scallops, and the presentation was restaurant magazine worthy. "Tyler, this is my mother, Patricia. Mom, meet Tyler Martinez, our head chef and my business partner." Tyler wiped his hands and extended one to my mother with a warm smile. "Mrs. Summers, it's so nice to see you again. Welcome to our kitchen. Please, call me Patricia, and thank you for that incredible meal the other night. I'm still thinking about that duck. I'm glad you enjoyed it. That's one of my favorite dishes to prepare. The cherry gastrique is made with fruit from a farm just outside the city, and we adjust the recipe seasonally based on what they're harvesting." My mother listened with genuine interest as Tyler explained his approach to menu development, how he balanced creativity with consistency, how he managed food costs while maintaining quality standards. These were the kinds of operational details that most diners never considered, but which determined whether a restaurant succeeded or failed. "How do you handle the pressure?" she asked. "I imagine dinner service can be quite intense." "It can be," Tyler agreed. "But Chloe and I have built systems that help us stay organized even during the busiest nights. And our team is exceptional. Everyone knows their role and works together seamlessly." I showed her our prep areas, the walk-in cooler where we stored ingredients from local farms, the office where I managed reservations and finances. Each space told part of the story of how we operated, how we'd created something sustainable and professional. "The organization is impressive," my mother said as we completed the kitchen tour. "Everything has its place. Everything serves a purpose. You can tell this isn't just passion, it's a real business. A real business." The phrase carried weight, coming from someone who understood commercial operations, who could recognize the difference between a hobby that happened to make money and a legitimate enterprise built for long-term success. We settled at a corner table in the dining room, and Kelly brought us coffee and a selection of pastries that Tyler had prepared for the afternoon. The restaurant was quiet, except for two customers working on laptops near the window, creating the perfect environment for a conversation that had been 2 years in the making. "I have to ask," my mother said, adding cream to her coffee with careful precision. "Why didn't you tell us? Not just about the restaurant, but about any of this. We thought you were struggling, and meanwhile you were building something remarkable." It was the question I'd been expecting, and I'd spent considerable time thinking about how to answer honestly without making her feel defensive. "Because I needed to prove to myself that I could do it without help," I said. "And because I was afraid that if you knew what I was attempting, you'd try to talk me out of it." "Would we have?" she asked, and there was genuine curiosity in her voice. "Honestly? Probably. You would have pointed out the statistics about restaurant failures, suggested I get more experience first, recommended safer alternatives. And you would have been trying to protect me, but I needed to take the risk." She sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "You're probably right. Your father and I have never been comfortable with uncertainty, and opening a restaurant is basically choosing uncertainty as a lifestyle." Choosing uncertainty as a lifestyle. It was an accurate description of entrepreneurship, especially in the food service industry where success depended on so many variables beyond your control. "But you've managed the uncertainty well," she continued. "This place feels stable, established. You've created something that seems built to last." "It's taken a lot of work to get here," I said. "The first year was especially challenging. Long hours, constant problem solving, financial stress, even when we were technically profitable." "What was the hardest part?" I considered the question, thinking back to those early months when every decision felt crucial and every mistake felt potentially catastrophic. "Learning to trust my own judgment," I said finally. "In the beginning, I second-guessed everything. Every menu change, every staffing decision, every marketing strategy. I kept waiting for someone with more experience to tell me I was doing it wrong." "And when did that change?" "Gradually, as we started getting positive reviews, as customers became regulars, as the team gelled into something really functional. There wasn't one moment, just a slow accumulation of evidence that maybe I actually knew what I was doing." My mother smiled. "That sounds familiar. When I started my staging business, I spent months convinced that someone was going to realize. I had no idea what I was talking about." It was the first time she'd ever shared anything about her own professional insecurities, and it created a moment of connection that felt different from our usual interactions. "You never seemed uncertain about anything," I said. "Because I was terrified of appearing uncertain. I thought confidence was something you either had or didn't have, not something you could develop through experience." Kelly appeared at our table with plates of Tyler's latest creations, small portions that showcased his range and creativity. A beet salad with goat cheese and candied walnuts, house-made gnocchi with brown butter sage sauce, and a deconstructed apple tart that managed to be both elegant and comforting. "Tyler wanted you to try some of the dishes we're considering for our fall menu," I explained. My mother tasted each dish with the careful attention of someone who appreciated good food, and I watched her expressions change from polite interest to genuine surprise to obvious pleasure. "This is restaurant-quality food," she said after trying the gnocchi. "This is a restaurant," I pointed out with a smile. "No, I mean this is the kind of food you'd expect at a much more expensive establishment. The technique, the presentation, the flavor combinations. Tyler is exceptionally talented." "He is. And he's also a good business partner. He understands that we're not just serving food, we're creating experiences for people." "Is that what you think about when you're here during service? The experiences you're creating?" It was a thoughtful question, one that got to the heart of why I loved this work despite its challenges. "Partly, I think about the couple celebrating their anniversary, the business deal being finalized over dessert, the friends reconnecting after months apart. Food brings people together in ways that few other things can, and we get to be part of those moments. That's beautiful, my mother said, and she seemed to mean it. I never thought about restaurants that way. How did you think about them? As service businesses, I suppose, places where you paid money and received food in return. But what you're describing is more like community building. Community building. It was an accurate description of what we tried to achieve. The reason we prioritized hiring locally and sourcing from nearby farms and supporting other independent businesses in the neighborhood. That's exactly what it is, I said. We're not just feeding people. We're creating a space where community happens. My mother looked around the dining room again, and I could see her processing this perspective, understanding the restaurant, not just as a business, but as a social institution. Your father is going to want to know about your financial projections, she said with a slight smile. He's been thinking about this since Monday night, trying to understand the business model. What specifically does he want to know? Everything. Revenue streams, profit margins, growth potential, competition analysis. You know how he is when he gets interested in a new business concept. I did know how my father was when something captured his professional attention. He approached new ventures with the thoroughness of someone who'd spent decades evaluating investment opportunities. I'd be happy to share that information with him, I said. I think he'll be impressed by our numbers. I'm sure he will be, but I think what will impress him most is seeing that you've built something sustainable. He worries about businesses that depend too heavily on the owner's personal involvement. This place could run without me for a week or two, I said. Tyler manages the kitchen operations, Kelly handles front-of-house coordination, and we have systems in place for most situations that might arise. But could it run without you permanently? It was a more complex question, one that touched on succession planning and long-term strategy. Not yet, I said honestly. Tyler and Kelly could manage day-to-day operations, but I'm still the primary decision-maker for strategic planning, financial management, and business development. That's something I need to work on as we continue growing. Growth plans? We're considering adding brunch service, and there's been some interest from customers about catering. Longer term, maybe a second location. But that's probably 3 or 4 years away. My mother nodded approvingly. Measured growth. That's smart. Too many businesses expand too quickly and lose what made them successful in the first place. Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. Through the front window, I saw my father's car pulling up to the curb. He wasn't supposed to be here until tomorrow, and I felt a moment of panic about having both parents in my restaurant at the same time. He entered looking slightly uncertain, the way people do when they're not sure they're welcome in a space. "Richard," my mother said with surprise, "what are you doing here?" "I was driving by after a client meeting and I saw your car," he said. "I thought I'd stop in and say hello if that's all right." "Of course it's all right," I said, standing to greet him. "Dad, welcome to Rosewood Bistro." He looked around. The dining room with the same careful attention my mother had shown, but I could see him processing different details. Where she had noticed design elements and atmosphere, he was calculating square footage and table turnover and operational efficiency. "This is quite impressive," he said. "Much larger than I expected, and clearly well managed." Amanda approached, with menus and the kind of professional warmth that made every customer feel valued. And I realized my father was getting the full customer experience, seeing how we treated people who walked in without reservations. "Actually," I said to Amanda, "this is my father. Could you let Tyler know he's here? I think he'd like to meet him." While we waited for Tyler, my father settled at our table and accepted coffee from Kelly, who managed the introduction with the same grace she brought to all customer interactions. "Kelly is our head server," I explained. "She also owns 5% of the restaurant." "Profit sharing?" my father asked with immediate interest. "Employee ownership," I corrected. "Kelly has equity in the business, not just a bonus program." My father's eyebrows went up. In his world of commercial real estate, employee ownership was unusual, sometimes seen as unnecessarily complicated or risky. "How does that work from a legal standpoint?" he asked Kelly directly. "Chloe structured it so that key employees can earn ownership stakes based on performance and tenure," Kelly explained. "It gives us real investment in the restaurant's success, not just our individual performance." "And how do you like it?" "I love it. I've worked in restaurants where servers were just interchangeable parts, where management didn't care about staff development or retention. Here, I'm building something with Chloe and Tyler, not just working for them." Tyler appeared from the kitchen, and I made introductions. My father stood to shake hands, a gesture of respect that Tyler clearly appreciated. "Mr. Summers, good to see you again. I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow. I was in the neighborhood and couldn't resist stopping by. Patricia has been telling me about your operation here, and I'm very impressed." "Would you like to see the kitchen?" Tyler offered. "I know Chloe gave Patricia the full tour, but I'd be happy to show you how we manage food costs and inventory." Food costs and inventory. Tyler had correctly identified the operational details that would most interest my father, the business fundamentals that determined profitability. They disappeared into the kitchen, and I could hear Tyler explaining our systems for managing waste, tracking ingredient costs, and maintaining quality standards. These were conversations my father understood, the kind of operational details that revealed whether a business was built for sustainable success. "He's very impressive," my mother said while we waited for them to return. "Professional, knowledgeable, but also personable. I can see why you chose him as a partner." "Tyler makes me a better business owner," I said. "He challenges my ideas, brings expertise I don't have, and shares the workload in ways that make everything more manageable." "Good partnerships are rare in any industry," she observed. "The fact that you found someone whose skills complement yours rather than competing with them shows excellent judgment." When my father and Tyler returned from the kitchen, my father looked genuinely impressed in a way I'd rarely seen. "Your inventory management system is very sophisticated," he told Tyler. "And your relationships with local suppliers seem well developed. That's not easy to achieve in a competitive market." "Chloe insisted on building those relationships from the beginning," Tyler said. "Even when we were small and our orders weren't significant, she made sure we paid promptly and treated vendors as partners rather than just suppliers." My father looked at me with something that might have been professional respect. "That's smart long-term thinking. Suppliers remember how you treat them when you're small, and those relationships become valuable as you grow." We spent the next hour discussing various aspects of the business: marketing strategies, staffing challenges, equipment maintenance, expansion possibilities. My parents asked thoughtful questions that revealed their growing understanding of what I'd built, and I found myself appreciating their professional perspectives on problems I'd been solving alone. At 4 o'clock, my parents prepared to leave so I could focus on dinner prep. As we stood by the front door, my father extended his hand in what felt like a formal business handshake. "Chloe, what you've accomplished here is remarkable. This is a professional operation by any standard, and you should be very proud." Professional operation by any standard. From someone who'd spent his career evaluating businesses, this was perhaps the highest compliment he could offer. "Thank you, Dad. That means a lot coming from you. I'm looking forward to our lunch tomorrow. I'd like to understand more about your growth strategy and long-term planning." After they left, I stood in the quiet dining room feeling a mixture of relief and satisfaction. The conversations had gone better than I'd hoped, revealing that my parents were capable of seeing my work through a professional lens rather than just a parental one. Tyler appeared beside me, probably noting my thoughtful expression. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Good," I said, somewhat surprised by my own answer. "Really good, actually. They're asking the right questions, showing genuine interest in understanding what we've built." Your father knows his stuff. His questions about inventory turnover and supplier relationships were exactly what I'd expect from someone with serious business experience. "What did you think of them?" Tyler considered the question carefully. "I think they're proud of you, even if they're still figuring out how to express that. And I think they're beginning to understand that what you've built here isn't just a personal achievement. It's a legitimate business that contributes to the community." Contributing to the community. It was something I thought about often but rarely articulated, the way Rosewood Bistro had become part of the neighborhood's social fabric. The evening prep crew began arriving, and the restaurant started its familiar transformation from quiet afternoon space to busy dinner service preparation. I moved through my usual pre-service routine, checking reservations, reviewing the evening's specials, ensuring that every detail was ready for another successful night. At 5:30, as I changed into my dinner service attire, I reflected on how much had changed in just 3 days. Monday night, my family had assumed I was struggling financially and needed their help to get my life together. Today, they'd spent hours learning about the sophisticated business I'd built, asking questions that revealed their growing respect for my professional accomplishments. The shift felt significant, but I also knew it was just the beginning of a longer process. Learning to include them in my life without compromising my independence would require ongoing negotiation, clear communication about boundaries, and mutual respect for the different perspectives we brought to the relationship. But for the first time in years, I felt optimistic about the possibility of having family relationships that included all of who I was: the successful business owner and the daughter, the independent adult and the sister, the person who'd built something meaningful and the family member who valued their love and support. Tomorrow's lunch with my father would be another step in that process, another opportunity to share my world with someone whose opinion mattered to me. And tonight, I would continue doing what I'd been doing for 2 years, running a restaurant that brought people together, created jobs for 17 employees, and contributed to the vibrant food scene that made Portland special. As the first customers of the evening began arriving and Amanda greeted them with her usual warmth, I felt the satisfaction that came from seeing something you'd built functioning exactly as intended. This was my life, my choice, my creation. And finally, my family was beginning to understand what that meant. Thursday's lunch with my father began with an unexpected phone call at 10 in the morning. I was in my office reviewing the previous night's receipts when his name appeared on my screen, and I felt the familiar flutter of anxiety that still accompanied direct contact from my parents. "Good morning, Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral despite my curiosity about why he was calling hours before our scheduled meeting. "Chloe, I hope you don't mind, but I've invited someone to join us for lunch today. My business partner, James Morrison, has been very curious about your restaurant since I mentioned it yesterday." James Morrison, senior partner at Morrison, Kelly and Associates, the firm where Brandon had just been promoted. A man whose opinion carried significant weight in Portland's commercial real estate community, someone whose interest in my business could mean opportunities or complications I wasn't prepared for. "Of course," I said, though my mind was racing through the implications. The more the merrier. I should mention that James has been looking for investment opportunities in the hospitality sector. He's not coming as a potential investor necessarily, just as someone who understands business fundamentals and is curious about successful independent operations. Investment opportunities. The phrase hung in the air with all its potential complications. For 2 years, I'd maintained complete financial independence, funding growth through retained earnings and carefully structured business loans. The idea of outside investment brought possibilities and risks I'd deliberately avoided considering. "I look forward to meeting him," I said, which was both true and terrifying. After we hung up, I sat in my office trying to process this development. Yesterday's conversation with my mother had focused on understanding my business as a personal achievement. Today's lunch would apparently involve evaluating it as a commercial opportunity. The shift from family interest to professional scrutiny felt significant, though I wasn't sure whether it represented progress or pressure. Tyler knocked on my office door at 11:30, carrying a tray with small portions of the dishes he'd dye. Prepared for lunch. "I wanted you to taste everything before your father and his associate arrive," he said, setting the tray on my desk. "I've prepared a menu that showcases our range without being too adventurous. The selections were perfect. Approachable enough for conservative palates, but sophisticated enough to demonstrate our capabilities. Pan-seared salmon with herb butter, braised short ribs with root vegetables, a seasonal risotto with local mushrooms, and our signature chocolate tart for dessert." "This looks incredible," I said after tasting each dish. "Exactly the right balance of impressive and accessible." "Are you nervous about this meeting?" Tyler asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. "A little. My father bringing a potential investor changes the dynamic from family conversation to business evaluation." "Is that necessarily bad?" I considered the question while finishing the salmon, which was cooked to perfection. "I don't know. I've been so focused on maintaining independence that I haven't really considered what growth with outside capital might look like." "Well," Tyler said pragmatically, "there's no obligation to accept investment even if it's offered. Sometimes these conversations are just opportunities to learn about different approaches to business development." At 1:15, I positioned myself near the front window to watch for my father's arrival. The lunch crowd had thinned to a few lingering customers, creating the perfect environment for a business conversation that required privacy and focus. My father arrived precisely on time, accompanied by a distinguished man in his early 60s, who carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most successful person in any room. James Morrison was shorter than I'd expected, but commanded attention through sheer presence, the kind of executive who made decisions that affected entire industries. Amanda greeted them with her usual professionalism, and I approached the host, stand with what I hoped was appropriate confidence. "Dad, good to see you again, and you must be Mr. Morrison." "James, please," he said, extending a firm handshake and looking around the dining room with obvious appreciation. "Richard has been telling me wonderful things about what you've built here. I'm very much looking forward to seeing it for myself." I led them to the corner table I'd reserved, positioned to provide privacy while offering a view of both the dining room and the kitchen activity. Kelly had prepared the table with our best linens and stemware, creating an atmosphere appropriate for serious business discussion. "Would you care for wine with lunch?" I asked as they settled into their seats. "We have an excellent selection of Oregon wines that pair beautifully with today's menu." "Actually," James said, "I'd love to hear about your wine program. Richard mentioned that you've developed relationships with local vintners." For the next 20 minutes, I explained our approach to wine selection, the partnerships we'd built with small family vineyards, the seasonal tasting events we hosted to educate customers about Oregon's wine industry. James listened with the focused attention of someone evaluating both the sophistication of our operation and the business potential of our approach. "Your markup structure is quite reasonable," he observed after reviewing our wine list. "Most restaurants in this category charge significantly more for comparable selections. We prefer volume over margin," I explained. "We'd rather have customers order a second bottle at a fair price than sell one bottle at an inflated rate. Smart, long-term thinking. Customer loyalty is worth more than short-term profit maximization." Tyler appeared tableside to present the first course and explain his preparation methods. I watched James's reaction as Tyler described sourcing ingredients from specific farms, adjusting recipes based on seasonal availability, and maintaining consistency despite constantly changing variables. "How do you manage food costs with such emphasis on local sourcing?" James asked Tyler directly. "Local ingredients typically cost more than wholesale alternatives." "They do," Tyler agreed. "But we've found that customers are willing to pay modestly higher prices for significantly better quality. Our food costs run about 2 percentage points higher than industry average, But our customer satisfaction scores and repeat business rates more than offset that difference. James nodded approvingly. Quality differentiation in a competitive market. That's sustainable positioning. As Tyler returned to the kitchen, my father leaned forward. James, why don't you tell Chloe about some of the hospitality investments you've been considering? I've been looking at the independent restaurant sector for about 18 months, James said. Portland has an incredibly dynamic food scene, but most operators struggle with the capital requirements for sustainable growth. Capital requirements for sustainable growth. The phrase suggested he understood the challenges I'd been navigating while building Rosewood Bistro. What kind of growth do you typically see as desirable? I asked. It depends on the operation, but generally I look for businesses that could support a second location within 3 to 5 years, or that could expand their current location to increase capacity. And what do you offer in exchange for investment? Capital for expansion, obviously, but also operational expertise, marketing support, and connections within the industry. I'm not interested in passive investment. I prefer partnerships where I can contribute more than just money. Partnerships where I can contribute more than just money. It sounded appealing in theory, but I'd spent 2 years learning to trust. My own judgment and the idea of sharing decision-making authority felt complicated. The main courses arrived, and our conversation shifted to operational details. James asked thoughtful questions about staffing costs, equipment maintenance, lease terms, and insurance requirements. These were the fundamentals that determined whether a restaurant succeeded long-term, and his questions revealed deep understanding of the industry's challenges. Your labor costs are higher than typical, he observed after I explained our wage structure and profit-sharing program. Intentionally. So, I said, we believe in paying living wages and sharing success with the people who create it. Then how does that affect your bottom line? Our turnover rate is virtually zero, which saves significantly on hiring and training costs. Our staff productivity is exceptionally high because everyone has real investment in our success. And our service quality is consistently excellent because employees feel valued and supported. James smiled with what appeared to be genuine admiration. You've essentially solved the industry's biggest problem, staff retention and motivation. That's worth more than the additional labor costs. That's been our experience. What about expansion plans? Richard mentioned you're considering adding brunch service. We're planning to launch weekend brunch in November, I said. We've done the market research, tested menu items, and calculated the additional staffing requirements. It should increase weekend revenue by about 30% without requiring significant capital investment. And beyond brunch, we've had inquiries about catering, which could be a natural extension of our current operation. Longer term, maybe a second location, but that would require careful market analysis and substantial capital. What kind of capital are we talking about? I'd actually run these numbers several months earlier, more as an intellectual exercise than serious planning. Probably $400,000 to $500,000 for a comparable space, depending on location and required renovations. James nodded thoughtfully. And how would you prefer to structure that kind of expansion financing? It was the question I'd been expecting the moment when this conversation shifted from general business discussion to specific investment consideration. Honestly, I haven't decided whether I want to pursue expansion that requires outside investment, I said. I've built this place by maintaining complete control over decisions, and I'm not sure I'm ready to compromise that independence. That's a fair concern, James said. But consider this. The right partner can accelerate growth while actually reducing your personal risk. Instead of betting everything on your own capital, you share both the investment and the potential returns. Share both the investment and the potential returns. It was a compelling argument, especially from someone whose track record suggested he understood how to build successful businesses. What would partnership look like practically? I asked. How would decision-making work? That depends on the specific deal structure, but typically I prefer arrangements where the operator maintains day-to-day control while major strategic decisions are made collaboratively. Day-to-day control with collaborative strategic decisions. It sounded reasonable in theory, but I wondered how it would work in practice when disagreements arose. Tyler reappeared to present dessert and coffee, and I noticed James watching. Our interaction with particular attention. He was observing not just the quality of our food and service, but the dynamics between Tyler and me, the efficiency of our operations, the way customers responded to our hospitality. "Tyler," James said, "how long have you been working with Chloe?" "Since the beginning," Tyler replied. "She convinced me to leave a position in New York to help build this place." "And how do you like the partnership structure?" "It's the best professional relationship I've ever had. Chloe gives me creative freedom while handling the business side, and we make strategic decisions together. Plus, having equity in the restaurant means I'm building something for myself, not just working for someone else." James looked intrigued. "Employee ownership isn't common in restaurant operations." "It should be," Tyler said with conviction. "The industry has problems with turnover and motivation because most places treat staff as replaceable expenses rather than valuable assets. When people have real investment in success, everything improves." After Tyler left to check on the afternoon prep, James returned his attention to me. "Your employee ownership structure is actually quite sophisticated. It creates loyalty while spreading financial risk. Very smart approach. Thank you. It reflects my belief that success should be shared with the people who create it." I completely agree. In fact, that philosophy could be part of what makes expansion successful. If you can replicate this culture at a second location, you'd have significant competitive advantages. The conversation continued for another hour, covering topics from market analysis to operational scaling to long-term vision. James asked detailed questions about my financial statements, growth projections, and competitive positioning. It felt like the most thorough business evaluation I'd ever experienced. As our lunch concluded, James placed his business card on the table. "Chloe, I'm genuinely impressed by what you've built here. If you decide you're interested in exploring expansion opportunities, I'd very much like to continue this conversation." "Thank you," I said, taking the card. "I appreciate your interest, and I'll definitely give it serious consideration." After they left, I sat alone at the corner table, processing everything that had transpired. In the span of 2 hours, my small family restaurant had been evaluated as a potential investment opportunity by one of Portland's most successful commercial developers. The validation was gratifying, but it also raised questions about what I wanted my future to look like. Kelly approached with fresh coffee and the knowing expression of someone who'd observed the entire interaction. "How did that go?" she asked, settling into the chair across from me. "Complicated," I said. "He made a compelling case for partnership and expansion, but I'm not sure I'm ready to give up the independence I've worked so hard to achieve." What did Tyler think? He seemed impressed by James's questions and approach. I don't think he's opposed to growth, especially if it means more opportunities for the team. "And what do you think?" It was the essential question, the one that would determine how I responded to James's offer. What did I actually want for Rosewood Bistro's future? "I think I need to understand my own priorities better before I make any major decisions," I said. 2 years ago, my goal was just to prove I could build something successful. Now I need to figure out what success looks like going forward. That evening, I called my first team meeting in months. Tyler, Kelly, and I gathered in the dining room after service to discuss the day's conversation and its potential implications. "Before we talk about expansion possibilities," I said, "I want to understand how you both feel about the direction we've been heading." Tyler leaned back in his chair, considering the question carefully. "I love what we've built here. The food quality, the team culture, the relationships with customers. It's everything I hoped for when I left New York. But I also think we have the potential to influence the industry more broadly if we expand thoughtfully. What do you mean by influence the industry? Prove that restaurants can be profitable while treating employees well, that quality doesn't require exploitation, that local sourcing and community partnerships are viable business strategies. One successful location is an anomaly. Multiple locations could be a model. Kelly nodded in agreement. I've worked in enough restaurants to know how rare this environment is. If we could replicate it elsewhere, we'd be creating opportunities for more people to have meaningful careers in hospitality. Multiple locations as a model for industry change. It was a perspective I hadn't considered, the idea that expansion could serve purposes beyond just business growth. And what about the risks? I asked. What if partnership changes the culture we've worked so hard to create? That's a real concern, Tyler acknowledged. But it might also be manageable if we structure things correctly. James seemed to understand and appreciate our approach rather than wanting to change it. The key would be maintaining control over the elements that make us successful, Kelly added. Our hiring practices, our commitment to quality, our employee ownership structure. If those are protected, other aspects of partnership might actually enhance what we're doing. We talked for another hour about various scenarios and possibilities. By the end of the conversation, I realized that my team was more open to growth than I'd expected, partly because they shared my values and partly because they trusted our ability to navigate challenges together. Over the next 2 weeks, I found myself thinking constantly about James's proposal and the broader questions it raised about my future. I researched his previous investments, spoke with other restaurant owners who'd accepted partnership deals, and analyzed our financial position to understand what expansion might require. The more I learned, the more intrigued I became. James's track record showed consistent success with hospitality investments, and his partners spoke positively about his collaborative approach and industry expertise. More importantly, his vision for growth aligned with my values about quality, sustainability, and employee welfare. 3 weeks after our lunch meeting, I called James to schedule a follow-up conversation. We met at Rosewood Bistro on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, and I came prepared with questions about deal structure, decision-making authority, and timeline expectations. I've been thinking about our conversation, I told him, and I'm interested in exploring what partnership might look like. James smiled with obvious satisfaction. I'm delighted to hear that. What questions can I answer? How would you structure a deal that preserves our culture while providing capital for growth? I'd propose a partnership where you maintain majority ownership and operational control. While I provide expansion capital and strategic guidance, you'd continue making day-to-day decisions, but we'd collaborate on major strategic choices like location selection, market expansion, and capital allocation. Majority ownership with operational control. It was better than I'd expected, suggesting that James understood the importance of preserving what made Rosewood Bistro successful. And what would your expectations be for return on investment? I typically look for businesses that can provide 15 to 20% annual returns over a 5-year period. Based on your current performance and growth potential, that seems achievable through expansion rather than increasing margins at your existing location. Achievable through expansion rather than increasing margins. It meant he wasn't planning to pressure us to cut costs or raise prices, but rather to grow revenue through additional locations. Timeline? I'd suggest we start with market research and location scouting over the next 6 months, with a goal of opening a second location within 18 months. That gives us time to plan thoroughly and ensures we don't compromise quality for speed. 18 months to a second location. It was aggressive, but not unrealistic, especially with adequate capital and professional support. I'd like to discuss this with Tyler and Kelly before making any final decisions, I said. This affects their futures as much as mine. Absolutely. In fact, I'd like to include them in our next conversation. Employee ownership and team input should be part of any partnership structure. 2 days later, the four of us met to discuss specific terms and expectations. James presented a detailed proposal that preserved our employee ownership structure, protected our operational autonomy, and provided clear pathways for growth. Tyler and Kelly asked thoughtful questions about their roles in an expanded operation, and James responded with specifics about career development opportunities and equity participation. By the end of that meeting, we had reached preliminary agreement on a partnership structure that felt mutually beneficial and respectful of our priorities. 6 months later, I stood in the construction site that would become Rosewood Bistro's second location, watching contractors install the kitchen equipment that Tyler had carefully selected. The new space was larger than our original restaurant, with capacity for 120 diners and a private dining room for special events. The partnership with James had exceeded my expectations in every way. He'd provided not just capital but genuine expertise, helping us navigate complex lease negotiations, city permitting processes, and equipment procurement. More importantly, he'd consistently respected our decision-making authority while offering valuable guidance when requested. Tyler would be executive chef for both locations, with promoted staff members heading each kitchen. Kelly was training 2 new managers who would eventually oversee front-of-house operations at each restaurant. Our employee ownership program had expanded to include senior staff at the new location, creating career advancement opportunities that didn't exist when we were a single restaurant. Most significantly, our original location had actually improved during the expansion process. The additional resources and professional support had allowed us to implement systems and procedures that increased efficiency while maintaining quality. Our revenue had grown 25% over the past 6 months, even before the second location opened. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in December, 8 months after our partnership had been finalized. My mother's voice carried an excitement I rarely heard from her. "Chloe, have you seen the article in Portland Monthly?" I hadn't, but I had a feeling I knew what she was referring to. The magazine had sent a reporter and photographer to interview us several weeks earlier for a feature on successful restaurant partnerships. "Not yet," I said. "Is it good?" "It's wonderful. The headline is, 'Local Success Story: How Independent Restaurants Can Grow Without Losing Their Soul.' There are beautiful photos of both locations, and they interview you, Tyler, Kelly, and James about the partnership model. Without losing their soul. It was exactly what I'd hoped people would understand about our approach to growth. They call you an example of how young entrepreneurs can build sustainable businesses while maintaining their values," my mother continued. "I'm so proud of you, Chloe. I'm so proud of you." From the woman who'd spent years worrying about my financial stability and career prospects, it represented a complete transformation in how she saw my choices and accomplishments. That evening, as I walked through both restaurants during dinner service, I reflected on how much had changed since that confrontational family dinner 18 months earlier. My parents now understood and appreciated what I'd built. My brother had become a regular customer who brought business associates to experience our hospitality. My family relationships had evolved to include all of who I was rather than just the parts they found comfortable. But more importantly, I'd learned that independence and partnership weren't mutually exclusive when built on shared values and mutual respect. James had enhanced our capabilities without compromising our culture. Our team had grown and developed professionally while maintaining the collaborative spirit that made our work meaningful. The success we'd achieved wasn't just measured in revenue or profit margins, though both were excellent. It was measured in the careers we'd created for our employees, the relationships we'd built with customers and suppliers, the contribution we'd made to Portland's reputation as a city where independent businesses could thrive. As I stood watching, Tyler coordinate both kitchens via video call, Kelly training new servers on our service standards, and customers enjoying meals that represented the best of what local hospitality could offer, I realized that this was what success actually looked like, not the absence of help or partnership, but the ability to choose collaboration that enhanced rather than compromised your vision. The young woman who'd kept her restaurant secret from her family for 2 years had evolved into someone who could build strategic partnerships while maintaining her independence, who could accept investment while preserving her values, who could grow her business while staying true to the principles that made it special. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't proving you don't need anyone. Sometimes it's demonstrating that you can choose your partnerships wisely, that you can accept support without surrendering control, that you can build something bigger than yourself while never losing sight of who you are. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.